You are listening to the Neurocareers Doing the Impossible podcast with Dr. K. Episode number 18, part 2. Dear Neurocareers podcast listeners, welcome to the second part of our fascinating conversation about the NeuroMeditation with Dr. Jeff Tarrant. If you haven't listened to the first part of this exciting episode, make sure you do that. You will enjoy this conversation. Thank you for being our listeners. Stay tuned. I think it's important to consider the need of the person. So why we are doing that meditation, the intent, yes, for what? When I started doing meditations, I wasn't aware of different styles. Again, for me, everything was just meditation. But I noticed that sometimes I get energized, but I cannot come down. So there are different approaches for a person to relax, to come down, or get energized. And this would be different types of meditation. So based on people's need, they can choose one type or another type. And I think you highlighted it very nicely in your book when you are talking also about different approaches, let's say for people with ADHD and with depression. So for people with different needs, you are suggesting also different type of meditations. What are the main conditions for those type of meditations that you can recommend people to work with?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it is kind of an important element of what we do. Where some of this understanding came from was looking at the research, right? Like we didn't just make this up. It's been pretty well documented, and it actually makes sense because what we know about the brain and brain plasticity is that the brain will adapt, it will change in accordance with what you give it, with what the input is. So if you practice a certain skill, you get better at that skill. And not only do you get better at the skill, but the brain changes to make it more efficient. The example that you brought up of ADHD, okay, well, so what are you not good at? Well, you're not good at paying attention. You're not good at inhibiting your impulses. And of course, those are frontal lobe functions largely. And we know that from lots of research that the frontal lobes are usually actually underactive in ADHD. They're actually not doing their job. They're a little bit under-aroused, which is why stimulant medication often helps because you're actually arousing the brain. You're helping it do its job. You're helping the frontal lobes work. Well, which meditations activate the frontal lobes? Focus. Focus style activates the frontal lobes. And what are you doing in focus? You're learning to pay attention. You're learning to notice yourself. You're learning to not be distracted. So you're actually practicing the exact skills that you don't have if you have ADHD. And you're exercising the same brain regions that need more attention. So literally there's almost a one-to-one correspondence in that regard that, you know, you can choose a meditation style based on what you need. Now, one aspect that's important about this is to recognize that if you're going to approach meditation this way, what that likely means is that the meditation style that's the hardest for you is probably the one that you need the most. Because if the meditation style is easy, if you can do it, your brain knows how to do that. You're not developing anything. But this is a problem, right? Because it's like, oh, great. So now you're asking me to do the hardest thing, right? Which is why we kind of want to take this developmental, individualized approach. Is that it's like, yes, if you want to grow your brain, if you want to develop certain skills, then that means you have to do something that's difficult, right? It's like, it's not going to be simple. I mean, why would it be easy to change your brain from something that it's been doing your whole life? So it takes repetition, and it means you probably have to learn how to do the thing that you're not good at. So it makes sense with ADHD. Mindfulness is really good for anxiety and stress because you're learning to step out of the situation and look at it more objectively and not become attached to it. It's the exact opposite of stress and anxiety. Stress and anxiety, part of the problem is that we're over attached to a thought or to a feeling. In fact, that's kind of what worry is. Worry is basically getting stuck on a thought. It's like repeating the same thought over and over and over and over and over and over again. And so mindfulness is the exact opposite. You're learning to let that go and observe it from more of a distance perspective. And so, not surprisingly, it does the exact opposite things in the brain. If you have this more open awareness, it does the exact opposite in the brain of what happens with stress and anxiety. So it's kind of a counterbalance. So you can use these meditation styles as a counterbalance. Open heart is going to be pretty obvious. Mood issues. So people struggling with depression or resentment or anger, stuff like that. You're learning to activate more positive circuits. Again, that's the way the brain works is with repetition. You got to sort of like make it work. Now, one thing I'll add to that real quick is because there's some research evidence and even just what we've noticed in our clinic is that sometimes if somebody comes in and they're significantly depressed or they've been depressed, asking them to do a open heart practice is way too much. They can't do it because they're in too dark of a space at the moment. And so asking them to fill their heart with love is like, it doesn't even make sense. And so in those cases, we actually start with focus first, because then what you're learning to do is shift your attention to something neutral. So this is the developmental piece, right? I'm not saying, okay, you're depressed, so just focus on love, because they can't. But if I say, let's just focus on something neutral, like your breath, well, neutral is better than negative. So we start there, shift the brain a little bit. And then once they start feeling a little bit better, now maybe we can start introducing things like gratitude or appreciation or eventually loving kindness, right? So it's almost like a stepwise process. Quiet mind is actually good for just about everything, which kind of makes sense. If all of us could get our brains to shut up for a second, it's probably going to help with just about everything. So the only reason that we don't recommend, we don't just tell everybody, just do quiet mind, forget all the rest, is for a couple of reasons. One is it's really hard for a lot of people to do. If quiet mind was the only option, a lot of people would just give up right off the bat, because anybody who's got a busy brain, which is a lot of people, and if that was the only option, they're not going to do it. The other reason is that for people that have a slow brain, it can often be a little bit problematic, because what you're doing is actually increasing slow brainwave activity with quiet mind. So if you've already got a slow brain and then you're increasing slow brainwave activity, that actually may not be a good option. So for some people, it can actually make them end up feeling depressed, because you're kind of like moving too far in that direction. So there are reasons why we may not want to use that one. But in general, especially if you have a fast brain and a busy brain, quiet mind is very good. So anyway, you can kind of see how you can start to pick and choose which styles might be a good fit for what you're trying to do.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's very important. First of all, to really realize, what do I need? I discovered it with the experiments and with the understanding that I have extremely busy brain. My brain is busy all the time. And the only one thing that was helping me, it was transcendental meditation. This is exactly what you were talking about. It's quieting the brain. Yes. That was a very important point. Thank you so much for talking about that. And another thing, also thank you for pointing this out about the things that seem hard to us. Very often as a coach, I work with people and people are saying, oh, that's very hard. And when I'm reading this book, I just don't understand anything. My brain refuses to do that. But that is the most important part. It means that your brain started actually working. Because when it was easy, it wasn't doing anything. It was just on autopilot. It used to do this thing for many, many years. But as soon as it gets hard, it means it started working. There is something new things that the brain needs to learn. And one of the people I respect very much, she always says, if you start feeling it gets easier, you are going the wrong direction. So it needs to be hard, which I think is very important to emphasize. However, like you said, there are different ways to make this journey possible. Yes, it's hard, but there is a way to help to overcome that resistance of our brain. And probably in many ways, neurofeedback comes to help. Can you now tell about the value of neurofeedback in learning to meditate, overcoming those difficulties on the way, and then, of course, making these different states of consciousness even deeper? But those are probably already the later stages of learning how to meditate.
Yeah, absolutely. We found that, using neurofeedback with meditation, and, what we've done is basically created approaches that fit for each of these styles, right? Because we kind of described very, briefly the different brain regions and what's going on with these different styles. And it's like, well, we can measure those things. If you can put the electrodes in the right spot and you've got a program that's sophisticated enough, we can make it do what we want, right? So we have approaches for all of these, for focus and mindfulness and open heart and whatever. And what we found is that combining the neurofeedback with this is very helpful. And the way that we tend to do it is by using audio feedback, because generally people are doing this with their eyes closed. Usually what we're doing is combining like meditation type music with the neurofeedback. So it might be like space music or something, right? And so there's music playing. And so the way we have it set up is that when the person is entering more of a meditative state, the music gets just a little bit louder, right? And then when they lose that state, they mind wander or whatever, then the music gets a little bit softer. So the music never goes all the way off, because that would be very disruptive if the music's like cutting in and out. So we wanted the feedback to be subtle, but enough to catch your attention. So you're hanging out in this space music, and then all of a sudden it kind of drops down. Well, that catches your attention, right? Like, oh, what happened? Oh, I'm mind wandering. Oh, whoops. Okay. It's like, can I get the music back? Well, how do I do that? Oh, I have to shift back into this particular state of consciousness. Okay, I do that. Oh, there's the music. Okay. Now can I just rest in this space and let the music kind of hold me in this state of consciousness? And so there's definitely a learning process involved, because you have to learn how to work with the feedback. Because initially, it's actually disruptive for most people, because all of a sudden you've got stuff on your head and there's music and the music's going up and down, and the brain is wanting to know, like, well, wait a minute, why'd the music get loud? What am I, and your brain wants to try and figure everything out, which then means you're not meditating. So usually the first session or two is a little bit of a struggle to figure out, like, oh, wait a minute, how do I relate to the feedback in a way that it can help me rather than interfere? And so, usually what we encourage people to do, right, it's like, you're not paying direct attention to the feedback. You're not trying to make it move necessarily. You're almost allowing it to be in the background. And so you don't have to do anything, because that subtle cue of the volume is going to be enough to trigger your awareness when it shifts. So really, you are just meditating, and you're using that as sort of like training wheels to help you be aware of your internal state. And so it's a little bit different than a traditional approach to neurofeedback, because with a traditional approach to neurofeedback, you're using the thresholding to encourage brain waves to either go up or down. I want more alpha, I want less theta, whatever. And you're almost kind of pushing on the brain a little bit. Like, well, come on, do this, do this. And with the neuromeditation approach, we're really not doing that. Instead, we're creating a parameter that kind of says, okay, if you're on this side of the line, what does that feel like? If you're on this side of the line, what does that feel like? And can you learn to distinguish what these different feeling states are and learn how to do that yourself and learn how to navigate your own internal awareness. So it really is more of a coach rather than kind of doing the work for you. A lot of people, when they first experiment with using neurofeedback with meditation, they're kind of expecting the neurofeedback to somehow take them into a meditative state. Like they don't have to do anything. And again, like from my perspective, it's like, well, you're kind of missing the point. Like, it's a skill. Meditation is a skill. And I don't want to hook myself up every time I meditate. It's a tool to help you really learn what that state feels like and how to get there more efficiently and how to stay there a little bit longer so that when you practice on your own, you kind of know where you're going without the feedback.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. And this what Thomas Feiner was alluding to in his talk, that it really, we're learning to self-regulate ourselves so that with time we wouldn't be dependent on any technology. We can do it ourselves. Technology is just an aid for us to do that. So, yes. And now, speaking about technology is developing very rapidly right now. And as you already mentioned, that it's good to have sufficient coverage of the electrodes, not only covering the frontal areas. I remember I've been to Eugene, Oregon, where are you right now? And I attended the EGI courses. So there's that classic coverage of 256 electrodes. So now, and at that time they were talking about 512. I don't know if they did it or not, but I think they wanted to create the real possibility to scan the brain. And so technology is developing really, really fast. How this development of the technology helps with the neurofeedback and especially with the neuromeditation? Are you using this development for the benefit of these fields?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things I want to kind of bring up on this topic. And, one is, it's interesting because, we have a tendency, it's like more. I need more electrodes. And really, I think we've kind of figured out that, diminishing returns, right? Like after a certain number of electrodes, you're not really gaining a whole lot by adding more electrodes. Now, you kind of need a certain number if you want to look deeper into the brain. And so there's techniques like Loretta that allow you to extrapolate from the surface of the brain to deeper brain regions. Now, it's not as good as an, fMRI in terms of localization. You can't go as deep as you can with technology like that, but you can, sort of image things like the anterior cingulate and the insula and the precuneus and brain regions that we're interested in with meditation. And so certainly we've used that kind of technology. Now you need at least 19 electrodes to be able to do that. But, most people doing neurofeedback have access to a 19 electrode cap. So we certainly have taken advantage of that to, do things that are a little bit more advanced and kind of, fancy. But actually what's funny is when we first started offering training on neuromeditation, I was kind of doing Loretta 19 channels with everybody, with everything. And my thinking was, this is the best approach, right? Because it's more specific than anything else. And so that's what I was doing. I was putting a cap on everybody. Of course, somebody at some point said, well, I've only got a 2-channel system. Can we do it with 2 channels? And I was like, that's a good question. I don't know. Now, I already told you, earlier in our conversation that most of the things we're looking at are 2 areas that we're particularly interested in. So the frontal lobes and, the back of the head, or the insula and the back of the head, or whatever. So I was like, well, I don't know, let's try it. So I made a bunch of protocols with 2 channels, and I was shocked that they seemed to work just about as good as having the 19 channels. So that was a good lesson for me, that more is not always better. that in some ways, it kind of, Occam's razor approach, right? What's the simplest solution, right? Like adding more stuff is not always the best approach. And it doesn't make it approachable to people who aren't in the neurofeedback world and have a bunch of fancy equipment. So I've really shifted toward how can we have effective protocols that are easier to use instead of making it more complicated. And so the second part I kind of wanted to talk about with this is, there have been more and more technologies coming out of good, dry, wireless headbands and, different types of headgear that work quite well and are starting to have enough flexibility that you can actually get to different parts of the brain, that you're not just stuck with FP1 and FP2, that there's other options. And so for me, that's been really exciting because now this headgear costs more than, the simple headbands that are out there, but you're getting more. And so I feel like the technology is advancing in a way that we're hitting this nice middle ground of where the sensors are more sophisticated, the placements are in better spots, the software is more sophisticated, and the price point is, it's still expensive, right? But it's like, we're talking about $500 or $600. If you're buying a clinical system, you're going to pay, who knows, tens of thousands of dollars. And, a lot of the sort of meditation headbands are out there cost, a couple $100. So I feel like this is like a nice upgrade from what's been in existence, but still is kind of within the range of possibility for a lot of people. So for me, that's where I'm excited is like seeing that it's like, okay, finally, the technology is starting to kind of like get to a place where it's more accessible and user-friendly to really, provide a better approach for kind of this neuromeditation idea that's not overly simplified.
Yes, absolutely. And how do you see the future of neuromeditation with the development of the technology or without it? Let's say maybe in 20 years or in 50 years. How do you think it will look like?
I have no idea. It's a great question. Somebody was just asking me something similar to that the other day, like, where do I see this going? I honestly don't know. Aside from the fact that I think the technology is going to get better and better, cheaper and cheaper, more user-friendly, the interfaces with our smartphones and with whatever, we've already got that, we've already got that now, but it's going to get, better and more efficient. Will we get to a point where, this stuff's kind of baked into our hats and our glasses? And again, people are already doing that as well, right? There's people who have done that and who've experimented with that. I don't know. I don't know what the public at large is going to, how they're going to want to use this. And so that's the part that I'm unsure about. I think the technology will adapt to what people want. And what I don't know is what people are going to want. Meditation has been available. Every city in the world has a meditation center. And how many people meditate? I used to give a lot of workshops, and it didn't matter where I was. I would often ask the audience, I'd say, how many of you are meditators? Raise your hand. And if I had 50 people in the audience, maybe 5 people would raise their hand. Now, they just came to a day-long workshop on meditation. So these are people that clearly have an interest in meditation. They're spending time and money to come and do this, but only 5% or 10% of the audience are meditators. But then if I said, how many of you have ever tried to meditate? And then it's like 92% of the hands go up, right? And so everybody knows that meditation is good for them, but the percentage of people who stick with it is very small. And so if that trend continues, if people continue to understand that this is important and it's good for you and that you can use it, for just about any kind of problem that you have, then maybe the technology will advance to sort of meet the needs of every, right? So that everybody's got, just like everybody's got a smartphone now, I don't know how old you are, but I remember when smartphones came out, right? Like, nobody had phones. And then, all of a sudden they became popular and it was kind of like, oh, okay, well, high school students can have smartphones, but not junior high students. Okay, now junior high students have phones. Okay, junior high students can have phones, but not elementary kids. Everybody has a phone now, and that just happened in a matter of a few years of where the entire culture changed in their attitude about a technology. And so I don't think this is going to be the same as a smartphone, but my point is that I think if there is an interest and people will actually engage with it, that certainly we've got the ability to create something that could be in everybody's home.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's a lot to do with the education about meditation, and that it really based on people's need. I think it's important. And also to help people, even by using the technology, to learn how to meditate. I started meditation a very long time ago, but it took me so much time because I remember just as a young teenager, I'm sitting meditating, and then all kinds of ideas come, just during that time. So it's already not about meditation, about catching. Oh, this is interesting. This is interesting. So and then, but I understand I don't learn to meditate really. So I think many people are trying, but it's very hard for them. It's very unknown field, and it might be much easier with education and also with the help of technology. So as that develop, I think more and more people will use it, definitely, because it's very, very beneficial. Of course, we don't know how everything will play out, but I'm sure you have your plans, yes, for the development or for your future work. What would that be? How do you see yourself in the future with your current work?
Yeah, there's kind of two different things that I'm kind of working on, and I'm hoping will take off. And one of them is, with a company that's already out there and already has a product, and the name of it's Divergence, and it's a software company. And so what they've done is made a software platform that works with different wearable headsets. So it's hardware agnostic. So you can use different kinds of EEG headsets, and you can essentially program it to do whatever you want. And we've kind of designed neuromeditation protocols that are built in. So, the person can just really select which protocol they want and hit the go button, and it's kind of all automated. So this is kind of the first time that we've had that ability where, people can do this without putting goop on your hair and, run it off of your phone and being a little bit more streamlined and efficient. And so I'm excited about where the directions of that company is moving and how we're advancing in that regard. The company's only been around for a little over a year, so I'm really pleased with kind of how things have been developing and moving with them. And then, other projects that I'm involved in are looking into anyway are more of it's a little bit of a hyper scanning type of technology where hyperscanning neurofeedback, where, for example, we could have 10 people, 20, 30, 500, doesn't matter, all over the world with our little headsets on and kind of in the same virtual room. And we all have to be in synchrony with each other to get the feedback. We all have to be in the right state of meditation together in order to get the feedback. So it's dependent on the group rather than just the individual. To me, I think there's some really exciting potential applications there. I mean, one, I think we need to be more connected to each other. And, second, we're learning from the hyperscanning research that, and I mean, every spiritual tradition talks about this, but now we're figuring out in science that our brain waves influence each other, whether we know it or not, and whether it sounds crazy. If you are connected to somebody, and it can be virtually, it doesn't have to be in person, your brain waves become synchronized with the other person's brain waves. And so this is really important, I think. And so for me, it's exciting because what it tells us is that we can have an influence on the people around us for good or bad. So it's a little bit of responsibility there, but how cool if we all kind of took that information and then used it to like, well, let's take advantage of it. If we're already connected, let's measure it and let's see if we can enhance that, right? So, I'm pretty excited about that idea. That may take a minute to get it fully developed, but that's where some of my ideas are going.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And it's again the new innovation that you are going for, which is not really known much. Yes, that even our EEG activity, our brain activity can influence the activity of other people. So it's just starting to develop. It's a very new field, and you are already going into it. Where does this feeling of innovation coming from? How do you develop it? How do you find those new beginnings that are just starting?
I think it's just my ADD. I mean, I'm sort of joking, but sort of not. But I have the most fun and I'm the most interested when I'm creating something. In the past, I've dabbled with things like, music or art or whatever. I'm not particularly great at any of those things, but I like to create. And so where I end up creating is in work. It's like, well, what kind of a teaching program can I create? Or what can I write? Or what kind of a cool tech idea can I create? And even that, like, I'm not a software engineer. I can't make any of this, but I know enough people in the field that if we can work together, we can create something like this together. So, I think for me, it's just I've kind of found a way to take advantage of the way my brain works, which is wanting to kind of like find new solutions, and I like to learn and I like to create. And so for me, it's kind of like if there's a new idea or there's something that's seems possible and it's fun, then it's like, cool, let's do it, right? And so, I'm lucky that I've got a career and a way to live that allows me that kind of flexibility. So, I feel lucky that I can, kind of explore a little bit and try different things.
Yes, absolutely. So you made your brain your best friend. Yes. Plus,
Sometimes.
and you just mentioned your career and possibilities that it provides you with. My question is, what was the most challenging part of your career, and how did you overcome it? What did you learn in the process that now helps you?
Wow, most challenging part of my career has been kind of all over the place. I made it sound really straightforward, but there have been various again, I like to experiment, I like to try new things, and sometimes that shows up in different career paths. I think a big challenge that I had was, I don't know if it's the biggest, but for a long time I was part owner of a pretty large clinic. This is back in Missouri, and we had a lot of providers and and a staff and all of that. And I mean, it's one thing to kind of like do your work, and it's another thing to run a clinic and try to take care of the people that work for you and keep growing and all of that. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that part. But I think the challenge came in where, in putting myself in that role, then I became a little bit trapped because it's like, okay, well, what if I want to do something else now? And it's like, oh, well, I kind of can't, right? I've created this big thing that I'm kind of the center of. And so I can't just walk away. I can't just go, okay, I'm done with that. I'm going to go do this other thing. And this has happened to me more than once. So it's a big challenge, and it created a lot of difficulties because trying to figure out a way when I was kind of done, I was like, okay, I'm done with this. I'm ready to move on. How do I gracefully exit? How do I hand this off to somebody else? And it didn't go the way I wanted, right? Like it wasn't smooth, and it wasn't, you know. So I think that's been kind of one of the challenges is, right? Like I like to create, I like to build things, and I have to have enough flexibility to be able to do what I want. And if there's a bright, shiny thing over here that I want to go look at, I want to be able to go do that. And it's hard to do both. It's a balance, right? Of kind of being grounded and also being able to fly around in the sky a little bit. So I think finding that balance has always been kind of one of the tricks.
Yeah, absolutely. And both are important. And I think it also depends, yes, on people, but you like to experiment. And for you, it's very important to have that flexibility. Absolutely. And what would be your advice to people who want to follow your step and maybe use neurofeedback and help people with their meditation practices, mindfulness practices, where they can start? Let's say if they're students or they just graduated, what would be your suggestion?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of information on our website, which is, just www.neuromeditationinstitute.com. It's a mouthful. It's a long URL, but there's a lot of information on there. There's a quiz that people can take, a styles inventory. So to help people identify which meditation style might be the best fit for what they're wanting to accomplish. There's some videos on there. We've got a YouTube channel that's got, I don't know, I think we have 40 videos at the moment of different aspects of, some of them are practices, walking meditation, a movement meditation, some talks about neurofeedback and about different aspects of what we do. So there's a lot of free resources. Obviously, there's the book that you've already mentioned. And then, if people really want to take a deeper dive, we have a certification course. Actually, we have 3 levels of certification. So if people really want to take a deeper dive, we have online courses that people can kind of do it on their own, or we do through Zoom meetings as well, if they want more, contact. And so, there's a lot of availability. And so really, I think just checking out the website and kind of looking around. And of course, if people have questions, they can always shoot us an email. And, we're happy to, answer whatever questions people have.
Absolutely. And we will add all that information in the podcast notes.
Thank you.
So it will be available. Yes, thank you very much. 2 last questions. Question number 1, because we're talking about the neuro and the brain, what was the most unexpected thing that you learned about the human brain over the course of your meditations and neurofeedback and neuromeditation?
Okay, I'll throw out a wild one here. And this is, kind of an area I've been looking at a lot more recently. So I think one of the things I'm really interested and curious about is states of consciousness, obviously. If you start looking at certain kinds of altered states of consciousness, or things that, depending on who's listening to this, right, they might think I'm a little bit out there, which is okay. That's all right. But people who claim to have some sort of, abilities, right, like psychic abilities or mediumship or something like that. And so I've looked at the brains of a lot of these people when they're doing their thing. And what's interesting is that there's an area in the back right corner of the brain that very frequently seems to go offline when they're doing their thing. And what's interesting about that is that part of the brain, so superior parietal lobule, could be the inferior parietal lobule, but, in that general vicinity, has a lot to do with the boundaries of self and other. So it's like when that area is doing its job, it's like, I'm Jeff, I live in this little body, and I'm me and you're you, and we're separate and whatever. And what we know from other research is that when that area of the brain is damaged or is not doing its job properly, people actually become more empathic and they feel more connected to others and they become more spiritual. And so it's interesting because we keep seeing that area of the brain behave differently in these certain individuals when they're doing these, kind of extraordinary things. So for me, stuff like that is really fascinating because what it suggests is that somehow there is a connection between brain and consciousness. I'm not saying that the brain generates consciousness necessarily, but there is some sort of a connection, and that we can start to identify what's going on in the brain or what's not going on in the brain with these really unusual, well, maybe they're not unusual, but, interesting ways of kind of engaging with consciousness. And so those kind of discoveries, kind of tying it back to your question, when I learn about that kind of stuff, that's what's the most fun or interesting or surprising. Because honestly, I don't expect that, right? I wouldn't have expected that. It's more like I saw it and then was like, what is that? And then started doing some research and go like, oh, other people have found this out. Like, I'm not the first one again, right? Like, it's like, this isn't new information, but people don't talk about it really, right? Actually, this part of the brain did get some recognition years ago. You might remember there was some buzz about the God spot in the brain. And this is that spot. And so now the researcher who discovered this didn't call it the God spot. That was, of course, the media. But they called it that because of this finding, right? That when there's a disruption to this part of the brain, people become more spiritual. And, and you see it with prayer and you see it with other things like this. And so anyway, I think that's super cool. And to me, that's exciting, right? Because that's like, well, is there a way that we can use that information to enhance our own spirituality, to make ourselves more open to these other kinds of connections? I don't know, but that's the fun.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. Is there a possibility to achieve this state of consciousness by doing neurofeedback?
I think so. Yeah. Well, in neurofeedback and using other neurotechnologies, right? Using pulsed electromagnetic frequencies or transcranial direct current or whatever, right? Audiovisual entrainment. So we've been kind of playing around with different tech to see, well, what happens if we disrupt that part of the brain, or if we, and if we do that in conjunction with a meditative state or whatever. And, we're still kind of at the beginning stages of some of that research, but it's very interesting. And I think we're on to something. You'll have to have me back on in a year or something, and I'll fill you in on the details.
I would love that. I absolutely would love that. Okay. Thank you so much. And the last question. The name of our podcast is Neurocareers Doing the Impossible. My question is how to do the impossible. Something that people are not doing so much yet. Even now, for example, you said that there is this very interesting area of how people, mediums and other people are working in. It's not very popular. Yes, by let's say scientific community yet. How at some point wasn't popular meditation. Yes, and now it's we know so much about that. Nevertheless, it doesn't stop you. You are brave enough to go and explore. So, what would be your recommendation to those who might feel uncomfortable doing things that maybe are not recognized by everybody yet, but they want to do or they're interested in doing it? So what would be your suggestion, recommendation, or advice?
I think the thing I would say that I'm finding as I get older and as I'm sort of maturing and, kind of watching my own process is trusting yourself, being honest with yourself and trusting yourself. And I think the other thing that's been helpful for me is surrounding myself with people that are supportive of these ideas and my way of doing things. They don't have to agree with me. That's okay. I don't mind. But being supportive of that and being supportive of exploration and being open to new ideas and being open to the idea that we don't know everything and we don't have it all figured out. And there's lots of mysteries. And so doesn't it make sense that we should ask questions? And if we find something weird, like that doesn't mean you should throw it out. It's like, that's the thing that you want to look at, I think, right? It's like you find something weird that doesn't belong. And it's like, well, what is that? How is that possible? I've seen some weird stuff, which is why I'm kind of following these paths, right? Because I've seen it. I've seen it with my own eyes. I can't deny it. And so then it's like, well, I want to understand that. Like, that's crazy. Like, how can certain people do things that seem impossible? Which is how I kind of got into the hyperscanning thing. Even that sounds crazy. Like, what do you mean people's brains influence each other? I know it sounds crazy, but we're proving it with science. And so I think this is the idea, right? That it's like, if we start to see that it's like, actually, there's a lot of science out there that already supports some of these ideas. So if we have crazy ideas, they may not be crazy. There's probably science out there that supports these ideas. And so I think if there's I don't even know if courage is the right word. It's like, but being willing to elevate and give a voice to some of that research, right? That it's like, it's almost like educating people, right? That it's just like, look, there's science here. Like, I'm not just making this up, right? Like there's something behind this. And I think, being willing to take criticism and being willing to have people, think you're crazy. Like, well, it's going to happen. And especially in the world we live in right now, right? Where like everybody has an opinion and everybody thinks they're right. And so it's kind of like, well, okay, and so, just being willing to accept that. So maybe we need more meditation, right? Like to sort of.
Absolutely. Actually, this is one of the questions that I wrote, but I didn't ask. I wanted to ask you, how would you see the world where people are meditating, that they made a meditation their just normal daily practice? How would you see this world, let's say 10 years, 20 years from now, if this trend of meditation continues?
Yeah. The short answer, I think, and this is something I've been very interested in, is psychological flexibility, psychological and cognitive flexibility, which is really a key component of therapeutic processes like ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, which is, very popular, is very successful. The whole thing is about being flexible, having an open mind, being able to see other perspectives. And I feel like this is a big problem right now in the world, is that people have become very closed off. They only hear and see what they want to hear and see. And they're not open to other ideas and other perspectives. Meditation helps create flexibility. And so what I would hope is that if more people meditated, they would be more open-minded, more flexible, less judgmental, less rigid. And, hopefully that would result in, us actually having important conversations about issues rather than just fighting with each other and, having some sort of resolution to all these crazy conflicts that we're in, I mean, that would be my hope. It makes sense. I don't know if that's what would happen, but it sounds good.
It does. Absolutely it does. And on this good note, I would like to thank you for this absolutely amazing thought-binding, very often podcast. And I'm looking forward to resuming it in a year to see how you progressed and what new things you discovered about our consciousness and about our brain. So I wish you all possible success in all your endeavors, and see you in a year.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.